A 6-point penalty, an injury crisis, a haphazard bunch of soon-to-be-out-of-contract players, a wayward manager or two, a bloke at the top we barely see hide nor hair of, a league dominated by the lucky parachute payment few, and Reading FC still managed to survive relegation. Was this the bottom of the barrel for the Royals' dismal few years, or merely the latest footnote in a terminal decline for a once proud club? Speaking of terminal decline, welcome to episode number 300 of the Tilehurst End podcast. I'm delighted to be your host, Marc Mayer, today, and I'm joined by two of the finest minds that we've had stretched over this long period of talking about a football club that really hasn't gone very far since we started this podcast, has it? Dan Wimbush, the founder of the Tilehurst End.
Thank you. You've let me back in. I was amazed, Usually people change the locks and everything like that, but no, really nice to be here. Episode 1 and now episode 300, and a few in the middle as well.
Well, that's the beauty of having it in a pub, is you just stumble upon all sorts of people, don't you?
I know, I was just walking past, I was like, coming in, come for the podcast. Thank you for having me back.
We are in the Brewdog in Reading. The other venues aren't actually available. I'm very happy for Brewdog if they do listen to this and give us some free things, because it's quite nice in here. And joining us as well, Adam Jones. How's it going, mate?
Yeah, I feel like I'm very inexperienced compared to you two. I feel like I joined episode 200, maybe 250, something like that. But I'm very happy to be here and nice to be in person.
Hey, it means we've got all kinds of years covered. And before we get into the season review for the 2021-2022 season, is that what we're on? I feel like there's so many twos and everything. It feels like so difficult to work out what season we're actually on these days. But let's have a little bit of a chat about our 300th episode, if we may, before we go on then. And Dan, when you first set up the podcast for what year was it that you set up the podcast then?
I was trying to think earlier. It's 2013-14 season. I think we took over from the Royals Post podcast.
Yeah.
And Johnny Fordham hung up the microphone. Westy said, "I'm done hosting." And I sort of said, yeah, I'll pick it up if you're happy, and got Westy involved and kept some new guy called Charles Watts involved.
Yeah, whatever happened to him.
No idea.
Very small presence on Twitter he has, isn't it? Yeah. And then we've come through. I remember 100th episode. I'm trying to think back. I'm not sure I can remember the 100th episode.
Me neither. I think it would have been around about playoff final kind of era.
Yeah, because we've been thinking about the various ones. We had the Carabao sponsored-ish sort of,
yes,
in the executive box of the Medeski Stadium, no less.
And one that we recorded in a hotel room in Manchester at the Football Blogging Awards when Steve Clarke was rumoured to be off and bound for Fulham. So yeah, a few interesting tales along the way, but it's great that the fact that the podcast has made it to 300, because I know how hard it is to produce it and put it together, and the fact that you've managed to keep it going through life's trials and tribulations is a massive testament to you and all the guys still left over at the Tilehurst End.
Well, and I've gone as far as today as printing out a plan as well, which usually I just have to send a link to a Google Doc and say, guys, it's the same link as before, go on the Zoom call at 8. So, it is. And I think we were just saying, I think I took over about 140 or so. I remember interviewing the band The Amazons for 150 when they were crude upstart in the world of indie pop, and I went and saw them at the O2 Arena, funnily enough, a few weeks ago. And then episode 200, I believe, was when I had a few of the old journalists and everything covering, I think, Fordham and Watts actually telling us their favourite stories. And now we arrive in the 150th anniversary year of Reading Football Club. And Adam, it's been, we'll get into the season review in a bit, but just as a bit of a preview for that, what a season it's been.
You could say that. I mean, I'm not often left speechless, to be honest, as a journalist, but this season has just been something else. It's just been one leap from one disaster to another, to be honest with you, and it's been it's been very turbulent. Probably the worst kind of off-field season that I've since I've supported the club. Most definitely, I don't think much else really could go wrong, to be honest with you. I mean, you could say that's Derby County supporters and they just laugh, but we've just had an absolutely awful season, just from one disaster to another. But at least we've made it through.
Yeah, I think that might well be the underlying message of this pod. We'll go through the disasters in just a moment. Before we do that, big thank you to our Patreon subscribers as always, and our sponsors, ZCZ Film.
You're listening to the Tilehurst End podcast by Reading fans for Reading fans.
Before we get into the season recap, I just wanted to spare a personal moment, if you will. Just a moment to say this episode really is for my dad, Dave, who passed away, unfortunately, quite unexpectedly earlier in the year. And this is just because he didn't necessarily have to be a Reading fan. He grew up north, came down south in the 80s and just wanted to go to live sport with his son in the same way that his dad took him. And he turned into, very quickly and without much persuasion, a massive Reading fan. And we had season tickets for many years and went away to the likes of West Ham, Southampton, Wigan, Bolton, where he grew up and everything. It was just the most amazing of times. And unfortunately, we lost him early in the year, so I just wanted to say that the club unfortunately has lost a great fan this season, and I'm sure I speak for many people who have lost loved ones over the last couple of years. That is something that the club is with my dad as well. The mural going up recently, which will have all kinds of fans on it and everything. I'm glad that he'll be on that as a permanent record to his dedication to the club. And certainly something that I'll be carrying on.
Come rain or shine, it's time to relive the latest match action with the recap.
This podcast is sponsored by ZCZ Films, Reading's oldest ultras.
So let's start way back in the summer of 2021, a more innocent time where we hadn't really thought about points deduction, and Veljko Paunovic had taken us off a pretty decent season last year. Actually, we missed out on the playoffs, but it wasn't by any means a failure of a season. And Reading came into the summer with a real sort of, I guess it was the transfer embargo was kind of the dominant story. But Dan, thinking back to what you expected of the season back last summer, what do you think you kind of maybe underestimated or overestimated about this club and this team?
I don't think I'd realised quite how deep the mess we'd got ourselves into. I think the points deduction and talk around that was floating around as far back as the summer, if not the bit of the season before. But I think it was only when you started seeing the lineups for the friendlies and the shirt numbers and things like that you actually realised, this isn't looking good here. And then the injuries as well, and that when you discover that Yaku Mete is going to miss large chunks of the season as well, and just all around that time, the walls seemed to be closing in on the club a bit, and you just hoped that. There was all this talk about how we're going to get around the embargo, the EFL are going to let us do this, that and the other. But until those reinforcements started to arrive, it was looking really bad. And God bless John Swift, because without him in those first few weeks of the season, it would have been a very different campaign.
Well, I remember actually I can't really remember what I predicted, but I definitely didn't predict us to do too well. We'll get on in a bit, talk about how we started, and there were talk of when the deduction came in, being like, will we be gutted if we finish 5 points off the playoffs? How gutting will that be? Well, that's just a fever dream, isn't it now? I remember thinking, someone like John Swift or Ovie Ejaria, who both of which up until the start of the season, or certainly Swift, had kind of flattered to deceive for Reading. And we were looking at these players because we knew Zhao was going to have injury problems. Mate, as you say, no idea who really was going to provide the goals. And we're looking at someone saying, someone's going to have to come up with something here. And luckily, as you say, it was John Swift. And Adam, I just want to go through... Actually, we'll go through your pre-season sort of thoughts, Adam, before we go through that friendly 11 that I've got up. But what were you thinking as you went into the season?
I was having nightmares about the left-back situation, to be honest with you, until we got Baba Rahman in. Also, we had that guy Lazar in from, I think he used to play for Watford.
Yeah.
I thought that was a bit of a disaster, to be honest with you. I thought he was very poor on the left-hand side. That was the one major memory, really, that I have from that pre-season, was just thinking, we're going to go into the season without a proper left-back, and, we actually didn't, really. Obviously, we had Ethan Bristow, but, that was a bit of a nightmare, to be honest with you. I think, I didn't expect it to be an easy season. I think when we had the transfer embargo and what have you, and then there was a bit of kind of unrest on social media where it led. I think it led to that club statement that came out about the embargo and where they're at with the EFL and that sort of thing. So, from that point, I was I was very nervous about this season, to be honest with you, and I always thought, to be honest, that we'd get a points deduction, and it was hanging over our heads, really. I think even in pre-season it was. So I was nervous about the season, to be honest with you. Not making any signings early on, so overall it was an anxiety for me going into the season.
Well, it wasn't until August the 12th that Reading did sign a player, and that meant that we went into our first proper friendly of the season, which was at home to West Ham with fans and everything. And we had this is the lineup that we had for that game: was Raphael in goal, Yiadom, Trialist B, as they were known on the club website, which I think was Akraf Lazar, who you alluded to, Morrison and Dorset in centre back, Rinomota Lauren, Ejaria, Trialist A, who was Edwards from West Brom, I seem to remember.
So.
Trialist A pops up everywhere in pre-season. You see him on team sheets everywhere.
And it's amazing no one signed him yet, because he obviously, the potential is there. With Femi Aziz and John Swift. So I think Aziz was up front then, or maybe John Swift as a false nine sort of deal. All of the subs were kids. There wasn't a senior player who came off the bench. And I guess, I want to talk about the academy in a second, but from that starting point, Dan, did the club actually do quite a decent job in the market to build a squad?
Fantastically well. I think, as you say, when you look at that lineup to what ultimately got us on that little nice mini run we went on at the end of September into October, I think, when we were even sort of flirting with the playoffs. As you mentioned, Baba Rahman coming in, proper left back, a guy who was once, Chelsea signed him being the heir apparent to Ashley Cole. Obviously, didn't work out that way.
Was that in the same January they signed Michael Hector?
Quite possibly.
Really, I think it was, and yeah, I guess that's maybe that kind of lessens the side. But Chelsea did sign him, as you're right. Like, he's still on their books now for another season, isn't he?
Exactly, and all of the players they did bring in seemed to boost us. Tom Dele-Bashiru, okay, a little bit unknown, coming off a major injury, but had a lot of promise to him. Baba Rahman, we mentioned. Danny Drinkwater, proven England international, Premier League winner. Okay, obviously lots of baggage associated with that and recent form, but getting these kind of names in were fantastic. Junior Hoylett as well, a player that's been there and done it at championship level. Halalovic, again, a player who had massive potential in the
Barcelona.
past. Exactly, and had played in the championship recently for Birmingham. All of the signings seem to tick a box. Scott Dam, fantastically experienced player as well eventually that we got in.
And Andy Carroll.
Andy Carroll, yeah.
Who would have thought in the summer, if you list those players to us in the summer at that West Ham game and include Andy Carroll, I think everyone snaps your hand off, don't they? Really?
100%. And the key was getting all of those players fit at the same time. And I think the great frustration for Reading fans was the fact that a lot of the time when these guys were signed, they didn't go straight into the lineup. They were kind of waiting in the wings for a while, trying to get match fit, because a lot of them hadn't had football. And that's been one of the great pains of football during the recession and beforehand, is that a lot of free agents now don't have clubs lined up and they're coming in at a standing start. And it was when they did, as I said, when they finally did get going, we were rattling off the wins, up until that, when Hoylett scores away at Cardiff and we go into an international break full of beans and loving life, you did actually start to turn your expectations level around. You thought, actually, from 1 to 11... this is a lineup that should compete in the Championship. Now, what happened to then disintegrate that positivity is, I'm sure we'll get into later in the show. But no, if you look at that business they did, credit to, whoever was making the signings, I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, isn't it? Is obviously we are... The phrase Keir Dratchbin has made it into the podcast almost 10 minutes in. We've got him without mentioning him, and that's still, unknown is just the word as to what exactly is going on there. There are the head of recruitment and everything. There is that Reading. There are these guys who it is their job. Unfortunately, the club hasn't really done a great job of publicising these guys in the way that maybe they had with Nicky Hammond, for example, who you really knew. He was in the media, he was in the club website and everything. They don't really have those guys anymore. Maybe that is a nervousness over Keir and such like that. But they did, these guys are there and they did make these signings. And I think the other side of that is that I think with these experienced players and everything that we've got into the club, we kind of only really built about a 14-player team out of that, didn't we? We didn't ever have like a bench of top-class professionals like that. And that meant that the academy had to step up. And Adam, is this one of the sour points of the season? And it's a big question mark as to why this is. I suppose we could do a whole podcast on it, but did the academy let down Reading this year?
It's a tough one, because you look at Cardiff City as an example. Later on in this campaign, they had Ruben Colwill kind of. I think he broke through actually under Mick McCarthy, but you had Colwill, Davis, you had King as well, who I think broke through Cardiff youth team. So you're looking at Reading, and there's no real kind of academy graduates, except from the ones that were already kind of established in the first team, that really kind of impressed that much. Obviously, we had the Jamari Clark brace at Birmingham, which was good. Femi Aziz for much of the season was injured, and that was a real source of frustration for me. I still think we're suffering from the fact that I'm not sure what summer it was, whether it wasn't last summer, maybe the summer before, where it was kind of the Medford Smith kind of generation, and we had like that, basically all of the under 23s. I think we kind of released most of them.
Yeah, it was with the pandemic, wasn't it?
You know, there are the occasional players like perhaps Clark and Tetek that can kind of step up, but I think we've kind of suffered a little bit with that, and I think, you know, the players that are kind of at the top of the academy now perhaps don't have the experience to step up, and I think for me, kind of releasing all those players that summer with, I think it was East, Medford Smith, other players as well, at the top of that bracket. That was kind of, I think that's kind of a consequence of that season, is that we haven't had that many academy graduates really impress.
But then the club also went through a fallow period with the academy after the Alex Pearce, Hal Robson Canoe generation, didn't it, of Simon Church? We had that kind of weird period where nobody broke through until, you know, you had sort of the Cools, Stacey's under Nigel Adkins. There was that kind of 2-year period around when the Zingarovic takeover happened and we were in the Premier League, when nobody else was putting their hands up. So it's not unusual, and I think if you do look at the positives, you know, like Adam mentioned, the fact you did still have Tom McIntyre make an impact, you had Tom Holmes making an impact. Let's not forget Luke Southwood as well, because I think as much as Luke Southwood's form trailed off quite dramatically, I think it all started with that blunder against Hull. He, for a period, was a really bright spot. Around the Andy Carroll period, Luke Southwood coming in after Raphael...
and keeping him out the team as well.
Exactly, after Raphael had his unfortunate self-inflicted injury that basically ended his time
after that whiteboard jumped at him in the tunnel.
I think he won Tilehurst End Player of the Month, what was it, 2-3 times?
Yeah, I think it was definitely 2, wasn't it?
And I think still at the end of the season he was one of the highest ranked players. So yes, unfortunately it seems like the club have made their minds up on him, but he came in and made an impact. He made some big saves in games. What helped win us that game at Fulham as well. So I think there's a little bit of recency bias with Southwood. So there were the little success stories. Femi Aziz, you mentioned, those early days before we signed the likes of Drinkwater, he was great. Unfortunately, as Adam mentioned, the injuries. So there were little glimmers. And I think perhaps we've got a bit greedy in expecting 4 or 5 academy players to come through at once. You will get these peaks and troughs.
And this generation did produce Michael Elise and Danny Loader.
Yeah.
Who, for all intents and purposes, I mean, I have my opinions on Elise, that I think some people will describe it as like criminal that he was sold in the summer, or in the way that he was sold. I mean, I'm never going to defend the fee that we got for him, although it could have been worse. There were a lot of players moving this summer for free, which Elise could have been for free if we hadn't put that release clause in. And you know, those are the two players. You wouldn't say once in a generation for Loader yet, but for Elise you definitely would. And they're once in a generation because there's only one of them. And you can't have 3 Elises coming through at once, can you? That's just not going to happen. And I suppose maybe the question now is for next season, which players are going to move through, which players are still going to be here, because the likes of Mamadi Camara are out of contract. We don't know the situation with that as we record this on the Monday night. So I think I would describe it as a disappointing season for the academy because the chance was there so much. But I mean, we're just about to go through the season itself, and we're about to talk about how the management of the club and the team was so dire at so many levels. It's not necessarily conducive to creating good players, is it, really? And we started the season. Late goals were the real plague for Reading early on. 4 points dropped in the first 6 games through late goals alone. Very nearly another 2 with a home win over Preston. I think they had a chance late on to pull that back to 2-2, having been dire the whole game as well. That really sucked the life and the confidence out of the fans. With the injury cries, talk of the points deduction as well, didn't it, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was quite difficult because obviously you mentioned before the transfers. You know, the first one came in I think it was like mid kind of August, so it was going to take a while for any of the additions to kind of bed in, and some of them obviously in the first game of the season. I don't think any of them had come in at that point. So and then obviously we've had the injuries. We didn't know that it was going to be such a crisis. I've said for years I think there's something going on with injuries, but I didn't realise it would be this bad this season. I thought perhaps last season would be the worst of it because of the COVID-19 pandemic and the packed schedule. But yeah, the injuries were pretty bad, to be honest. And Yeah, it was. I mean, we had a very high point against Preston. We thought, this is it now. We're going to go on and have an okay season. I didn't come away from it and think, we're going to have an absolutely amazing season. But I thought, right, after our opening day defeat against Stoke, 3-2, right, we're back in the game now, and we'll go on to have an okay season. Obviously, the game was following that, and obviously Huddersfield as well. I think it was just before the international break. It just set a sour tone really, and it was not a fantastic start to the season. Let's just say that.
I think the warning signs though were there from the very first few games. You talk about those early defeats, and I remember sitting there. I think it was the Bristol City game at home. And the amount of back post goals we were conceding, and just
so easy for them, wasn't it?
Shoddy defending. And I think that's one of the things that soured, especially myself, on Veljko Paunovic early, was I'm sitting here seeing this from my seat in the Dolan. How is he not seeing this on the training? And how is he not drilling these guys into defending better? I know obviously the personnel was changing and we didn't have the greatest of combinations in defence, but it was just a defensive shambles, and the just same mistakes over and over again. You can accept when you get outclassed in this division, and Lord knows, we ran into some teams at the wrong time. We'll go on to the Fulham debacle later on. But
and to be fair, you can add Huddersfield into that. Yeah. In hindsight, losing 4-0 away at Huddersfield perfectly fits the league table at the end of the season, doesn't
exactly.
it?
But you meant, the Preston game, we very nearly threw away. I remember us playing Peterborough, and Peterborough were matching us for long periods in that game. And I think we got the moment of magic from John Swift, then a couple of cracking strikes from Deli Bashiru. Yeah. But the warning signs were there very early on, and it was a case of why, going back to what I was saying about looking at that lineup on paper, thinking it's a really solid lineup. Suddenly we're looking at how they're actually playing in games. You were left scratching your head going, well, is this the players? Is it the management? What's happening?
Yeah, and it's funny because as those players like Drinkwater and everyone started to click, Reading won 5 of their next 6, including away at Fulham, who obviously went on to win the title, which put Reading on the verge of the playoffs. And I think, it's a bit of an anomaly, a bit of an outlier to think about it now, because every team at some point of the season will win 3 or 4, 5 and 6 or something. Even Barnsley, who worried us momentarily in the relegation battle, finished bottom. They picked up pretty much 2/3 of their points in about 4 weeks of each other, didn't they? So every team does this, but Reading did put it together kind of early in the season, right on the verge of the playoffs. 2-0 up at home to Blackpool on October the 20th. We lost 3-2. That was the start of 4 defeats in a row, and I think it's the old cliche that it's the hope that kills you, and Reading fans had hope for that briefest of periods, and it all just collapsed in the most dramatic of fashions. And I don't think, even under Jaap Stam when we lost all those games, I don't think it was quite as dramatic as kind of post that October 20th defeat to Blackpool, what we had for the next few months afterwards. I've never seen anything like that at the club before.
Yeah, I think for me, the Blackpool game, I think it just shows really the difference between a team that really worked together well and gelled together well, and a group of individuals. And for me, in that second half, that came to fruition really. Neil Critch's side were fantastic. They weren't, you look at the side on paper, obviously Blackpool side, and you're thinking, we could beat these 100%, man to man, we could 100% beat them. But in terms of them being a team, they were absolutely fantastic. They gelled together well. Obviously, Neil Critchley in the summer had recruited very well with some youngsters, and then you look at us and we were just after half time we just collapsed really, and just mentally we just weren't working together at all. It was just, and I think for me that was a real turning point in the season. So that was another warning sign really, that this season wasn't going to be absolutely fantastic because of the we weren't working together cohesively at all.
Well, it's funny you say that, because it really looked like out of nowhere we were going to get that kind of big squad mentality when we won 3-2 at Swansea. Fast forward to November 27th, this is Andy Carroll with that wonderful goal kind of on the counter, scoring the sort of goal that none of us thought Andy Carroll would be scoring for Reading, and the old rowboat that supposedly Paunovic had got on the floor and in the dressing room and said everyone's in the boat together. We didn't win again until February the 19th after that, Dan. So I suppose it wasn't... What was the deal with that? Was it that there wasn't actually the squad mentality that it suggested, or...?
It's hard to put an exact finger on it, but I think one of the things, and just sort of going back to that Blackpool game and what Adam mentioned, Blackpool pressed us. And I think one of the things you saw throughout, basically until Lucas João returned, kind of maybe slightly delayed when Carroll came in, but Reading never had a plan B. They never had a plan B way of playing, and they just lacked ways to hurt teams. So when you added in the fact that defensive shambles that we've mentioned, they had George Puskas. Let's not forget that George Puskas, bless him, was running around up front on his own for months. And there were games where the man had something like 4 touches.
Yeah.
This wasn't even a case, he missed 1 or 2 big chances, but he was getting nothing. The bloke was just running side to side, but he didn't have the pace to harry and chase down defenders, and he didn't have the strength of a Joao or Carroll to win the ball on his own. So Reading only kind of clicked when Paunovic said, this isn't working, we're going to play 4 midfielders, rotate them around, and that's what coincided with our little spell of good form. And I think that's when Hoylett might have got injured, and maybe Halalovic as well, and they had to get away from that and put Puskas back in. Reading were the easiest book to read for months, because as I said, they didn't have pace to get in behind teams, they didn't have power, and teams figured out, okay, we'll just shut John Swift down and we'll come out on top. Now Carroll, as mentioned in that Swansea game, did give us a different dynamic for a few months, and God bless him again for coming in and giving the fans a massive lift off the pitch as well, because without Carroll coming through, without the homegrown success story of Luke Southwood, those November, December months were so miserable, and they just gave us that lift. And they mentioned being in the boat together. The cracks were massively appearing under Paunovic. You talk about that collapse, Mark, that none of us have kind of seen for years as Reading fans, going back to probably our last year at Elm Park under Bullivant. For the last time you had to go, I know Handbags isn't here in spirit, but I thought I'd dig up some Elm Park stuff.
Handbags was going to be here tonight, just for disclosure, but unfortunately not. And it's just, we'll get on to Kidderminster and Fulham in a second, but the moment when you say about no plan B, we went to West Brom, and West Brom had a COVID problem and a COVID crisis basically, and they were good then. They weren't the crap team that turned up at the end of the season for us, and they had to put some kids in and all this sort of stuff, and they played all right, to be fair. I thought they over-egged their problems, but we had Halilovic, Deli Bashiru and Cowell up front, and we hadn't got a Scooby-Doo how we were going to score. And you couldn't hit Cowell long because the 2 players around him, one was kind of a nippy midfielder, one was a playmaking midfielder, but you couldn't put the ball in behind, you couldn't work things down the wing because neither were wingers. We just found ourselves, partly injury and partly through, Paunovic didn't have the balls to do something radical, did he? He wasn't going to do a complete change and stick with it, and maybe he just didn't have the knowledge, the tactical know-how to create something. And it just meant that over the Christmas period we just drifted massively, and it coincided in Kidderminster.
Yeah, it was just rudderless really, just there was no real direction. I know that we suffered with an injury crisis, but I remember that West Brom game, and I think going forward West Brom were just dreadful really in that final third, which proved to be a constant theme throughout Valerian Ismail's kind of tenure, and we didn't really kind of capitalise on that. I think we had a chance with Tom Deli Bashiru. We should have done much better really, and that was I think one kind of bright spark from that game was Deli Bashiru on that left wing. I think he was very lively, but I think that was when our crisis really hit as well in terms of injuries, I thought it was just, to be honest with you, that whole game was just, I know that we were suffering obviously with injuries and what have you, but we should have done much better. We were vastly underperforming still, and that was a real disappointment. And I guess that's kind of been a theme of the whole season really. It's just players that are not playing up to expectations, players that are not playing up to their potential.
You can see, sorry Mike, you can see how the club can go, our dressing room can go into a spiral as well. I remember Steve Clark talking about a spiral of, I think he called it a spiral of negativity or something along the lines, when his squad were going through that end of season collapse around the cup run. And when your team doesn't have a way of scoring goals, it's not scoring goals, and you then start throwing in all the calamitous errors we were having as well, you just got this, you saw the confidence drain every time a team would go and score. The heads were down, the body language was bad, and that permeated all the way through the spring.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? And then what it led to was, I think you talk about the the FA Cup season there where we had the Championship was just dreadful, and I think back to the Clement season, which I suppose is a bit more. This is very similar to me for that Clement year when we stayed up after Stam left and Clement just kind of kept us up just by the fortune of other teams being bad. I think this is such a similar season, and you have those moments in that Clement season. Was it we lost 4-0 at home to Ipswich and everything was just horrendous, and unfortunately these moments just kept coming for Reading this year. We had, I mean, the 150th anniversary game just got wrecked by COVID, unfortunately. We were meant to be playing Luton. I have sympathy with the club for that. When it came to Coventry, it just didn't work as well. Kidderminster, I mean, I do think we do need to dig into this a little bit, because third round of the FA Cup, 6th tier Kidderminster, 1-0 up at half-time, I think it was, or shortly after half-time we scored. And what happened next was just so symbolic of what's gone wrong with the club. And I think, what was your reaction to it, Adam? Because mine was almost just a kind of numbness to it, that you just know that we almost deserved it, and you can't argue or get angry or anything. You just know that this is what has been coming for months.
Yeah, I think for me, coming into the game, I was a bit nervous. So to me, it wasn't a complete shock to see us beat them. To be honest with you, I think just coming into that game, it was just. I think it was shortly before that we had that collapse against Derby County, and I think it was Curtis Davis with the header to make it 2-2, and in stoppage time, and that was just dreadful, to be honest with you. So the mental fragility I was quite concerned about, and in terms of post-match, we 100% deserved to lose that game. There was just nothing really going on, and I thought it was symbolic really of the issues off the pitch as well. The fact that we had, I think it was Dejan Tetic at right back, and I can't remember who was at left back. I think it might have been Bristow or someone like that, and the fact that we had that embargo, and the fact that they were probably playing there because of that embargo, and just the whole mess. Really, it was symbolic really of the off-field stuff as well, and it kind of exposed it. And I'm just glad we weren't on live TV, to be honest with you, because that would have been a massive kind of humiliation. Well, not in terms of main channels anyway. I just thought we 100% deserved it, and all I could really do was congratulate Kidderminster, because we didn't deserve to come away from that with anything, to be honest with you.
Yeah, at least they almost knocked out West Ham in the next round. So I'll drag forward one of the questions from the mailbag for this moment, because I think it is a pressing question for this. Tom tweeted us, said, at what point of the season did the club lose the fans rather than the squad? For me, it was the radio silence after Kidderminster. Since then, there's been no active accountability anywhere in the hierarchy. I mean, maybe I'd suggest the Blackpool game instead. This is the sort of time when we lost 7-0 to Fulham down, which in and of itself should be probably the moment of sadness for the season, but it wasn't. This is also around the time when Liam Moore got stripped of the captaincy and got kind of hastily shoved out the door in what was kind of actually a reasonable transfer deal, but the questions around it and the way that the club did the statement, and obviously Liam Moore publicly disagreeing with it, as obviously was going to happen, which they should have seen coming. What was the moment for you that the club, because we talked about the team and the tactics and the manager, but this was actually the season when the club as a whole really kind of started to lose, or just showed that they were losing their way?
It's very hard to put on a specific moment. I mean, you've just rattled off 3 or 4 things that could quite easily tip any sane fan over the edge. I think it's just the cluster mentality. I think, again, it's the tide had been rising, the water level had been rising and rising and rising for years up until this moment, and the club, I think you used to be really proud to be a Reading fan, because Reading, I know John Keane, who's been on this show before, was very proud and keeps mentioning the Reading way, and Reading very much had a way up until the Zingarovic takeover, and for the decades since it's been eroded, and various fans have had their fill and walked off at any point over that last decade. And the embarrassment of losing to a 6th tier side, especially when you've taken the lead, is one thing. The absolute getting humped at home by Fulham is another. Your captain getting stripped. The bizarre cryptic comments coming out of the club. I remember Paunovic saying something along the lines of, I wanted to pick a stronger team, but I wasn't allowed,
And eventually he was saying that the suggestion that he wanted to resign but wasn't allowed to as well.
Exactly. And all of this was happening at once. And as a fan, it was like that Sideshow Bob episode of The Simpsons where he's just stepping on rake after rake after rake. And it was very hard to find a fan at that point who was fully behind the club. But the problem the club has had for the last 5 years, like you say, is the lack of accountability. Because who did you vent your frustration at? Fans were talking about, let's run on the pitch and go and stand in front of the director's box. Well, the owner's not there. So unless he sits there and watches and gets sent pictures, he's not going to know. Paunovic was clearly, doesn't have much power. And the players themselves had proven themselves over a period of seasons and weeks and months to be largely just either devoid of confidence or just proven not to be up to it. So, again, it sounds like a bit of a cop-out, but it was at any point, I think, between the start of the season and then. And I just think that those rapid blows in quick succession just turned the balance. And everybody knew after Kidderminster and Fulham that something had to change. And the only thing that clubs in the modern era can really change is a manager.
And they didn't.
No.
They refused for far too long, and actually our winless run that started on November 27th ended on February the 19th, by which time Paunovic's fate was sealed and he won the game. I mean, even that was a pretty nervy one, as Preston almost pulled it back to 3-3 late on. And I suppose that just over the season as a whole, I've got a few stats that I picked up, and I think this, for me, this isn't going to sound like the most coherent piece of analysis ever, but for me it just kind of underlines the fact that there wasn't one overriding issue that you would look at that team and say they were awful at set pieces, or they were bad at defending, or they didn't create enough on the counter, or it's kind of all of those things at once, because you look at the stats, and we won last year's Fair Play Award by miles. We've won it this year again in the Championship. We've got the best discipline record. Some people say that's us being soft, which I totally understand as an argument, but we've actually made the second most tackles per home game in the Championship this season. Fourth most for attempted tackles overall, but we're also the fourth most dribbled past team, if that's a stat that people want to take some things up. We're the second most fouled team, the third most dribbles, and yet we have the second least shots. And the first least shots at home in the Championship, which, I mean, that's just kind of over your Joe, isn't it? That's a lot of dribbles, and not. I suppose that is the style, no substance aesthetic to this team that, in the attacking sense, it kind of summed up to me on the last game of the season with Lucas Shaw at Luton. Laurent bursts into the box, cuts the ball back to him, doesn't he, Adam? And instead of swiping a shot with his right foot first time, he tries to drag it into his body and hold off two defenders, which would have then meant he had to do some sort of skill. And he's good at that, don't get me wrong, but just hit the ball. Yeah,
I mean, this is the problem. This isn't Reading FC, is it? I mean, I don't want to take us too far back to the past. I'm not one to focus too much on the past, but it's not Reading FC. It's not in our identity to, usually when you think about Reading over the years, you're thinking front foot football, make a fast start. It doesn't always have to be 4-4-2, and I understand, not everyone uses 4-4-2 now. It's quite actually rare, but just having front foot football, making really fast starts game. That's another thing for me, which was really frustrating. We didn't make fast starts at all, and that's always what we used to do. That was key really to our success under Steve Cobble. So, I mean, it's not where we've been successful before, kind of passing it around with no substance or and anything like that. It was literally, as you summed it up, kind of all style and no substance. And even it was lacking a little bit of style as well, because there's just nothing. It was just directionless, and there was no substance behind it. And that was the real frustrating thing for me, because you could tell some of the calibre of the players that we had, Ajaria and Swift and even likes of Lauren and Renamoto pushing forward. We can play fast, front foot fast football, but we're just too slow and directionless, to be honest with you.
It's courage as well, Mark. And I think, and I don't mean, look, players were putting their body on the line to make blocks, and they did make tackles, but all too often a game was getting out of our way. And I think when you talk about the fair point thing, you needed someone to go in for the 40-60 tackle. You needed somebody to take on a defender and try the trick in the dangerous position. But all too often, and it goes back right to the Stam era, it was the safe pass, wasn't it? It was the pass it back, pass it sideways, and there is nothing. Stam's team got to a playoff final doing that, and fair play to them. I don't want to get back into that season because of getting flashbacks, but. There wasn't the courage. There was nobody taking the games by the scruff of the neck. People tried. I loved when Andy Minamoto came back into the side, that he was charging around the field, and you kind of got that. Andy Iadon was, and I think that's one of the reasons he ended up with the Player of the Season award, was he was trying. Carroll, you could see, was trying, but it just needed players to gamble a bit more, to take the risks on. But it goes back to what I was saying earlier, when you've got that fragility in the defence and you're like constantly on edge knowing that, we're probably going to concede in a minute, and also at the other end you're like, well, we're not scoring very many goals, players are just going to revert back to safety, and that's why you end up with, whether you call it style or whatever we were playing, that's how it ended out.
Yeah, well, it comes back to me for scoreboard pressure, and it's a phrase that's used more in like baseball and cricket and stuff like that, but scoreboard pressure in football is absolutely true as well. Is that we think about, it's vulnerable being 1-0 up or something, but last season Paunovic's teams, if they got in the lead, they would win, and if we didn't get in the lead, we would lose. Like, that would be how we got to 7th place last year. And this season, I mean, the late goals and everything, I think the late goals do tie into the fair play thing, because we weren't doing those professional fouls, we weren't doing the slowing the play down or time wasting. I'm not sure when was the last time I saw Reading play for time wasting. Like, we just don't do it. We're too nice, and it falls into a characteristic that I guess Reading have been accused of over the years, of being too nice. But I suppose to wrap up the kind of Paunovic era for this part of the show, it's just all at once, isn't it? It's just that the attack wasn't good enough, the defence wasn't good enough, the midfield wasn't good enough, there were errors in the goalkeeping area, the management wasn't good enough. It was just everything. And Paul Ince came in, and it was almost like Jose Gomez had came back, hadn't it? Because we pulled out a few late goals, had the win at Sheffield United, which I think was probably my favourite game I went to all season. The draw at home to Swansea obviously was a brilliant comeback. And we did just enough, wasn't it? And over that period, Paul Ince won 4, draw 3, lost 7. That's 20th in the Championship for the form table over that period. Luckily, below us in that form table is Derby, which I think is probably the main reason we stayed up. But what did Paul Ince change then for you, Adam, as he came in? Did anything actually really improve, or did we just kind of generally get a little bit better?
I think I'm trying to compare this from the kind of latter stage of Paunovic's era and the Birmingham game. I think in terms of the Birmingham game, I think it was Paul Ince's first game in charge. We were a little bit better going back, but then you saw the defensive fragility kind of come in again, and that was a real source of frustration kind of throughout parts of the season. So there was parts of games where I thought we were a little bit more kind of defensively solid. I think, to be honest with you, all it needed was a fresh voice in the dressing room. I think that was, I'm not trying to discredit Paul Ince's work, but I can't think of many things that he did much better. Obviously, he had some of the players coming back as well from injuries. Obviously, even throughout the latter stage of Paunovic's time at the club, there was injuries. I think the atmosphere off the pitch improved just a tiny bit. Perhaps that also played a part. And fair play to Ince, he's kept us up, but I can't think of too many things that he did that were improved. I think it was just sometimes, and at times, it wasn't all the time, but the defensive work kind of having a little bit of more of a shape.
Yeah, and I think the defence did improve, at least briefly, for a couple of wins against Stoke and Birmingham. And Dan, for you, what was the main reason that Reading ultimately did stay up?
I think they kind of reverted to their form norm. If you look at things like XG and things like that, Reading were usually doing enough, and the run we'd been on, there was going to be a natural bounce. At some point, players the quality of Jow were going to start getting goals, and the defence was going to stop committing stupid individual errors enough to get us a couple of results, and that's what happened. And he did galvanise the dressing room for whatever it was. I mean, I know that the end form table says we're 20th, but I think you can almost scrub out. I think you and Ollie were talking about after the whole game.
3 defeats in a row at the end.
At the end, once safety had been secured. So if you take those away, up until safety secured, it's 1-4, drawn 3, lost 3.
Yeah.
Kind of mid-table form. And I think if you look at Reading's lineup, I said our best lineup on paper, which we were getting out towards the end of the season under Ince. It's a team that should be 16th, 17th, 18th. It's in the mix with a lot of other lower mid-table sides like Hull, Cardiff and all that lot. So just getting over the line, I think in that Blackburn game was a massive boost to say, look, we can do this. Obviously credit as well to Paunovic for getting that win at Preston as well. That gave the club an Ince a nice springboard to go off. Because he didn't have to completely turn the truck around, at 90 miles an hour about to go over the cliff. It had already started to stop and there was something to hang on to. he could come into the dressing room and say, look lads, you just gone and won this game against a decent championship side, you can do it again. He did get a bit more out of Tom Ince, whether that's the fatherly thing, I don't know. And Lucas João proved why he is one of the best strikers in the championship with key goals. You throw in a little bit of late drama, a little bit of belief, a little bit of passion, and the club got just enough to get over the line. Now, we've stayed up with one of the lowest points tallies of a team to ever stay up. We've conceded more goals than any team that's ever stayed up, and it's the most goals that the team has conceded in the league since, I think, 1931. So there is nothing, we could have gone down in any other season. We didn't. There were two dreadful sides below us in Barnsley and Peterborough, and Derby are a basket case worse than us. So, but look, as they say, you can only play what's in front of you. Yeah. We got over the line, and Paul Ince did enough to pull us out of the nosedive and get us back to a bumpy landing, but we've landed in one piece.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, isn't it? Is that Paul Ince he does 100% deserve credit for getting the job done. And also, you think there's a really snide article in The Athletic, and other people were writing about this, is when he came in, the sheer incredulity that Reading had, the hubris that Reading had employing this man who had been out of work for 9 years, let alone like the fact that he's a footballing legend in a lot of ways in how his playing career went out, and his managerial career is not as bad as certain other managers who are still in work in the Championship these days. So yeah, I think he did do a really good job, it has to be said. And whether we stick with him or not, I mean, we'll discuss a bit later on in the show. And also, I mean, we're recording this on Monday night. There's a very good chance on Tuesday morning we'll know who the next manager is, at which point we will do a podcast on when the next manager and the next team is announced, because there's more on that to come later in the show. But yeah, I think that's the thing, is that Reading have just stayed up. Let's draw to a close the season review part of this podcast. We've got the mailbag coming up, and then a short summer preview. So let's go into your questions now.
For all the latest Reading news, analysis and opinion, visit the website at thetilehurstend.com.
So, as always, you can get in touch with the show via the Twitter, the Facebook and the Gmail, thetilehurstend@gmail.com. And as I say, we'll probably be having a new podcast when the manager gets announced, so do get your thoughts in for that. Matt Williams has tweeted us in this week saying, if you had the power to change one result from the season, which one would it be? What an array of results we have in front of us to pick from for this question. I mean, the obvious answer, I guess, is Kidderminster. If you change Blackpool, you don't actually change much of the season, do you? Because we're not going to magic into the playoffs if we beat Blackpool that one day when we lost, which we spoke about earlier, having been 2-0 up. Dan, any other? Fulham, maybe?
Fulham was embarrassing, but I think in the way that Fulham have swept aside most of the Championship this season has kind of taken the edge away. I think
beaten about 4 teams 7-0 as well.
Exactly. So I mean that's bad, but it has to be Kidderminster, because I think, again, the impetus from a good cup run, not to mention the financial boost that we could have badly needed. Had we drawn them West Ham in the next round, you could be talking about an extra, several £100,000 in the kitty, which the club desperately need the cash at the moment. Albeit, the owners are happy to put in, but for whatever the financial rules are in the future, we need to be making our own cash. So I think just the embarrassment factor, and for what it could have done, it could have given another opportunity for youngsters to show themselves. It can just turn around the whole, flow of a season, a cup result like that. So for me, it's got to be that one. Otherwise, I'm scratching my head. I think maybe the first game of the season, Stoke. I think if we hold on, again, maybe things turn out a bit differently, but you never know.
What we didn't mention in the review is that was actually the first game with away fans that Reading had been able to go to for was 18 months or 2 years or something like that. It was ages and ages, which would have been a big boost for certainly those guys going. Adam, any wild card picks on that question?
I don't know, I'm afraid. I have to go, I have to be honest with you, with that Blackpool game. I really do. I mean, I just think, personally, I think that the heartbreak that I felt at the end of that game was just unreal, really, because of just the manner of the second half collapse for me was, it was pretty awful, to be honest with you. So that's the one game that I'd really go for, and I just think that game kind of just took the stuffing out of us, really, and summed up the entire season. So I'd definitely go with that one.
Yeah, Waldemar Januzak saying, how different would the season have been had João Mate and Rinomhota been fit for the whole season? Lucas João's return, particularly in the kind of late Paunovic, more importantly early Ince period of the season, was probably the most important reason we stayed up. Now, I don't think that that's anything to frown upon, because Lucas João is our player. We bought him for a very good fee. We pay him good money. He scores good goals in the Championship. He's a good player. So I don't think that's something to look down on Reading for. But the fact is, if he didn't come back from injury then, I don't think we'd have stayed up. So to go back to the question, if he'd have been there the entire season, do you think we'd probably still have Veljko Paunovic as manager?
Quite possibly. I think Paunovic probably would have seen out his contract, and I think we would have finished, especially presuming the points deduction would still have happened. I think we probably would have ended up 15th, 16th. I think his goals, as I mentioned, the fact we had George Puskas running around trying and failing for months on end, and being absolutely no threat at all, we would have edged a few of those games out. We would have found a way to get over the line, or not to mention, he's decent in our own box as well. So maybe we could have defended a few of the set piece goals that we conceded late on as well. So, and you add Mate and Renamoto to the mix, and the chances, go up even more. That's three of our best players. It's three players that are probably wanted by the clubs as well.
Yeah. I mean, Mate and João have 1 year left on their contract this season, as we speak now. So, really, I mean, if the club gets a 10 million offer for Lucas João,
I mean, you compare it. I mean, you flip Valdemar's question around. How would Reading's season in 2016-17 have been if he had taken away Jan Kermigan, Paul McShane, and John Swift?
Yeah.
Or Ali Al Habsi. It's like you say, there's no real shame in having a player that makes a massive difference to your football club. Reading had a £5 million striker that wasn't fit for two-thirds of the season, and also another player that's been valued at 3 to 5 million as well in Yaku Mate, and a former player of the season in Andy Renamoto. That's 25% of your starting lineup. Add those players, and the season could be a hell of a lot different.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and I think it is something that we probably as fans, when it comes to criticising the club, of which I'm happy to do, but the injury crisis, a lot of those injuries were out of the club's hands. I mean, Yaku Mate did his knee literally about a week after the previous season ended, so there's no way that the club can be held accountable for that. And João is unfortunate. I remember when it was the Preston game, did he do his groin or something in a really awkward collision and stuff? And Renamoto, I mean, these things happen, and unfortunately when they happen to your best players, and think about if it happened to De Bruyne or Salah, like Liverpool and City aren't going to replace those players. They got all the money in the world, so it's one of those things that Reading just have had to deal with, and hopefully next season won't go against us if those players are still here. Nick asking, how does a board which allows talented youngsters to leave for pittance, almost all player contracts lapse at the same time, with finances to get totally out of control, justify 25% pay rise? Who controls transfers, the manager or the owner, or the totally non-self-interested agent, who we won't name? Adam, I suppose the question out of that is, going into the summer, the control of transfers is going to be a big question. What can the club do to reassure fans over the summer?
I think, in my view, I think planning should have started months ago, behind the scenes. I think, there are some that would say, well, we didn't know whether we were going to be in Championship or League One at the time, but I think that's why you need to create contingency plans behind the scenes. Whether there were the footballing heads, actually behind the scenes at that time, I'm not 100% sure. Perhaps Marc Bowen will come in and help that. I'm not 100% sure. Hopefully he will, but we should have started planning months ago. Having a director of football, I think, will kind of help to kind of give us a little bit of a...
More on that later, by the way.
Yeah, to help us have a little bit of an identity. The thing is, right, I look at that 2017 summer window, and when we splashed out a little bit, with Gourlay at the helm, did we have a set vision? Did we have a vision of where we wanted to go, a set style? Where do we want to be in the next couple of years? I think it was Mr. Dye and others that kept on saying we want to get back to the Premier League, but how are we going to do it? What goals do we want to achieve on the way? And for me, it was just we need a set vision, not just for next season. Obviously we've got the EFL business plan to abide by, but that's not going to inspire players. You've got to have a vision for the next few years, in my opinion. I think you've got to give players that may only be there for 1 year give them motivation to earn that second or third year. For me, I think you've got to have a full vision of where you want to go, how you're going to achieve it, and I think for me, having that long-term plan and maybe even displaying that kind of plan to the fans, and kind of having that transparency and that openness, I think will go a long way in helping.
And Adam makes a great point about kind of incentivising and making players want to stick around. If you're a player at Reading at the moment, you're not going to earn more money on your next contract because the club is financially constrained, and a lot of players had signed in an era where the cash was flowing freely. So, okay, would you stay for success? Well, you're looking around at how the squad have performed, and all your mates are off. You're probably not going to stick around for that. So then, how do you sell Reading Football Club? Do you sell it on the basis of the future? Like Adam said, you've got to have a plan. You've got to be able to say, this is the guy we're going to get to manage the football club. This is how we're going to do it. We've got a philosophy. You have got nice things to show off. You've got this fantastic training ground at Bearwood. You've got still a decent stadium. Reading's still a nice area of the country to live in.
We still get in a few fans as well.
Exactly. It's far from a club that's completely beyond repair. But Adam's made the great point. You've got to have the vision, and you've got to get a plan in place, and early as possible. Now we're going to talk about Marc Bowen. We've talked briefly about Paul Ince. The sooner the manager is in place, and the sooner a director of football is in place. Most importantly, having a director of football or a managing sporting director, whatever you want to call him, that's got the authority to make these decisions independently of any external influences. So whether it's Mr. Dye just saying, okay, here's your budget, Mark, you can spend it however you want, I'm giving you control, or whether the vice chairman, whoever it is still going to have his say, whether agents are still going to come in and Dye's going to say, oh, Mark, I think we should sign this guy. He's been offered to us, and I'm going to say yes. Is that still going to happen? We don't know. We're not in those echelons of power. I don't think even half of the people working for the football club know whether those decisions are going to be taken. So I completely get why people like Nick are frustrated. The mistakes that have been made over the past 5 years are, going back to the Sideshow Bob analogy, it's rake after rake after rake we've stepped on. Turning down bids for players, letting contracts expire. But the problem is that once you get into that downward spiral, you can't then just suddenly go to Andy Rinamota and say, here's a new 4-year deal. Because the EFL are going to say, well, you can't. And Andy Rinamota's also probably going to say, actually, I'm going to wait and see how this plays out. Don't forget, a club can throw as many contracts as they want at a player. The player, as Adam said, has still got to want to sign and want to stay at a football club. So for as much flack as the board get, and I will throw a fair share of it at them, once the train is heading in a direction, you can absolutely understand how you can't stop it very easily. The momentum's there. The negative momentum is too strong. And now, at least, if there is one positive to be heading into this summer, it's that there is an almost clean slate to work with.
Yeah, I go back to the Michael Elise analogy, and this obviously isn't something that I can prove, but I just think that when they put a contract in front of him, they said, I'll have a release clause to make sure that if I do well I can leave, or I'm not signing a thing. Because why would he have said, I'll have a 5-year contract at Reading and I'll be here forever and that's it? Because that's lovely for us fans, but he's not a Reading fan. He's not he's from London anyway, not really from the area. So players like that aren't really going to do that.
And they did this as well. Don't forget that they threw 4-year contracts at Liam Moore, Yaku Mate, John Swift. There was a time where Yaku Mate was getting a new contract every 6 months.
Yeah.
And then fans, not all fans, some fans would then turn around and say, well, why are we handing out these new contracts? Why are we tying up players for so long? Because then that takes away the incentive, as Adam was kind of saying, to earn that second and third year. So it's a really double-edged sword. And as I said, the leverage hasn't been in Reading's favour for at least the last 2 years, if not longer.
Well, I think that's why, particularly this summer, where there are going to be a lot of players out of contract, genuinely, it's not just us that are having a lot of players out of contract this year. I think you go to the upper League One players, and the players like Josh Lauren, who we signed 2 years ago, who's done a brilliant job, and who none of us had heard of before we signed him. You go to players like that and you say, this is, firstly, probably a bit of a pay rise, what you were earning at MK Dons or wherever. You say, you can be a stepping stone here. We're not expecting you to be here for 300 games, because we are going to, this is something that you touched on a moment ago. Reading need to now sell players in the way that Brentford, Reading of old have done, and loads of other clubs, because that's how you generate money as a championship club. It's been a massive bugbear of mine for years. And then you build a team actually while doing that. And there's no doubt that over the summer we're going to pick up players like Drinkwater again, who obviously know how to do it. We've obviously got the contracts to do that, and that's fine. But put 3 or 4 of those in a 8-man team or 7-man team of hungry League One players who haven't played at this level yet. And maybe those guys won't have all the quality in the world, but they might try, like Stink.
To use an analogy, Reading over the past 4 or 5 years have been like a bad second-hand car. And it's one of those cars that, something goes, say like your clutch goes, you go to the mechanic, says, the rest of the car's fine, just get a new clutch. 3 months later, the brake pads have gone. If you just buy some more brake pads, the car will be fine. And all you're doing is plugging holes. More and more holes, as more things are going wrong. And actually, you just need to say, I'm getting rid of this car. Yeah. It's not right. I'm going to start with something from scratch that I know is proven. And that's, like you say, Mark, that's what Reading have got to do now. They've got to say, all of the things we've tried before, we've tried, it's not worked. I've learnt my lesson, here's where we go now.
Yeah, I mean, Matthew Wright, the next question, he says, what was the real reason that Dye bought Reading FC? And I think we'll all agree, that's a pretty straightforward question. He bought Reading FC to have a Premier League football team, is what he wanted, and that's what he still thinks he can get. And to cover this one myself, I think that I came across a Twitter conversation with the journalist Alan Nixon earlier, who was talking about Derby and someone trying to buy Derby. And I only caught half it, so I probably didn't really... I'm not interpreting this perfectly, but what I took from it is that he basically said, like, if you want to buy a Premier League football team, you have to buy a Derby. You can't go and buy, like, Everton anymore unless you have ridiculous wealth. You can't even really go and buy, like, a Huddersfield, because those guys are still too expensive. So 4 years ago, a Reading was the best you could get for buying a club that you could then put some money in and get a Premier League team if it goes well 5 years later. Dye still has the money, Reading still have the potential. Things have gone downhill since then, but I just think he bought it to have a Premier League team. And will he get bored? I mean, that's the $1 billion question, but for now I just think that he's almost in too deep, because no one's going to buy Reading off him, certainly not for what he paid for it, and certainly with the amount of loans that he has, and he owns the stadium now, he's in too deep to change. So yeah, I just think for that bit it's pretty straightforward. He probably still genuinely believes. I mean, he's a man who's worth so much money, probably doesn't get told that he's doing things wrong or anything very often. I don't no idea about his upbringing, obviously, but I just think that is still just going to be determined as ever to make Reading a success. Anything to add? I think it's just pretty clear, isn't it?
I think you summed it up perfectly. I think he bought it to have a Premier League team. When I think it was when the official takeover went through. I think it might have been half time. I think of the playoff semi-finals or something like that, or that at full time. So they were one game from the Premier League at that point. Obviously, they're interested. Their interest dated back, I think, quite a few months before that. I know Charles Watts was reporting it quite a few months. I think it was even into the December the previous year, and we were in decent form at that point. Where we're a club that's reasonably close to London. As you said, it's an all right place to live for players. We were an attractive asset, and I thought okay, there's mixed opinions on the Thai ownership. I thought they steadied the ship. I think without them, we would have been all but gone really with Zingarovic. So for me, I think that the Thai consortium, though they had their own benefits from us, I think they made us into an okay asset again, and a reasonably attractive one. So I think Dye thought we were an attractive club and bought it thinking that we'd be in the Premier League, and it kind of shows really, because he rolled the dice and it didn't work.
Yeah, it's only a couple of things to add. Obviously, they were very highly linked with Hull. Going against Hull, who were, again, a similar kind of stature, a football club to Reading, similar recent history of been yo-yoing up and down between the Premier League and the Championship, and for whatever reason that got rebuffed. Again, there was a long period where this takeover had to get approved. I remember it sort of hanging over for quite a while, because that sort of back half of the playoff season is when it all happened. But there was a big thing politically for a kind of a push for wealthy Chinese individuals to go and make better business links with Europe, and one of the ways that was seen to do that was to buy football clubs, because football clubs are heavily embedded with communities, and that's why you saw a string of Chinese takeovers of football clubs in Europe and and around the world. That kind of policy suddenly then got pulled back If you remember, there was a lot of investment in the Chinese Super League as well. They were signing players like Oscar, all kinds of players were going over there, and then suddenly it was actually stop spending your money outside of China, and that's why a lot of clubs, I think Inter, got themselves into trouble.
Yeah, I think AC Milan were Chinese owned, I think, and then got bought out by an American group because and Inter were another team who are still actually in massive issues because of it, and
even
a lot of Chinese teams got. What was the team that won the league?
Beijing, was it Beijing?
Guangzhou.
Was it Reina? Oh God!
Well, Beijing Reina is
I'm butchering these pronunciations. I apologise, CSL fans.
I was going to say our Chinese listenership are turning off in their droves.
I'm still a semi-professional, unprofessional joke for a podcast, and not much has changed there, folks.
Well, Beijing Ren is Dai Yong's team, who obviously got relegated, having had Sonny Aluko in their team, famously, and then. I think it's Guangzhou Evergrande or one of those teams won the league and folded about 3 weeks later, which just underlines what you're talking about, doesn't it?
Yeah, so there was an edict generally to kind of pull back from other than the ones you kind of already owned. So that's why you haven't seen a lot of high-profile Chinese takeovers of football clubs in the past few years. So again, I agree with you two. I don't think there was any sort of. I know, kind of. I don't know if Matt White is hinting at it here, but I know there have been talks about, is it do dodgy stuff? I don't think there's anything to do with that. I think it was, again, a push from the establishment to get involved with sport as a way to sort of increase business generally. And I think there's a passion there. The fact that don't forget, the bloke still turns up to games. He's not just sat, thousands of miles away, faceless and anonymous. Whilst he doesn't talk a lot, he's still clearly involved in the football club, and everyone's been at pains to say. I was reading an old article with Marc Bowen that Simon linked today, and Marc was saying that this guy cares passionately about it. He's putting money in hand over fist that he's allowed to, and it's just not working out for whatever reason.
And that's the question, isn't it? If he'd have done it 5 years earlier, before FFP was a thing.
Well, look, exactly the same's happened at Wolves and other clubs.
I was going to say, we, especially given our links to a prominent agent of good players, if we'd have had unlimited budget for the year when we signed like Rafael, João, Puskas, where would that spending have stopped? And there's a very good reason to say it would only have stopped when we got in the Premier League.
And I'll just interject the final point on Dai, and I was reading because a lot of Birmingham fans have had similar problems with their Chinese ownership, and they published a piece. I know Star have been asking for answers from our ownership, and I think the Birmingham, I did with their Supporters Trust or similar group, had asked for answers from their owners. I think one of the things that came back from that group was that, I can't remember, it was Birmingham or West Brom now. I know there was Birmingham because it was talking about St Andrews, was the fact that the business culture in China is, we don't explain things, we prefer to show things. Yeah. So they don't often come out, they sort of said the business culture over there isn't constant dialogue with stakeholders. It's trust us to go and do our job, and then we'll come out. So I just think that, again, there is a cultural difference, or a business cultural difference, should I say, that still some fans can't accept, and whether fans should have to accept it is another question entirely, because should an owner of a championship club be more inclined to deal with football fans and accept that it's a different kind of business? Again, that's a whole other debate, but again, I don't think that this owner is putting up red flag after red flag after red flag. I just think that they've just made bad decisions, innocently bad decisions.
Yeah, and also, I mean, you saw the video of him running on the pitch after the game that he turned up to. I can't remember what game that was actually, but shows that there is a person behind all this money, and he's a human being who wants to have success and everything, and wants the team to do well, that he's obviously put a lot of time as well as his money into. There's massively rich people value their time perhaps more than anyone else, given how much they can spend with it. So it is a big commitment for him, and I suppose that I would just say my final point is that if there were no financial fair play, there is a real good reason to think that there'd be a lot of money being put in. Rob McGowan said a brief discussion on appointment of Noel Hunt and the under-23 squad this year. Both of the academy teams have really struggled this year in terms of their league position. The under-23s probably had about one player who was over 20 years old in it, so I'm not too sure there was much to expect out of those guys. The appointment of Noel Hunt, though, I mean, I guess you got to say, Adam, that a lot of the time we talk as fans that we want a bit more history and soul and everything to the club, and we want a bit more recognition and of what's gone by and all that sort of stuff. And Noel Hunt, I don't know, none of us can really say exactly how good he is as a coach, but he is all of those things, isn't he?
Yeah, I don't think this is a case of getting the band back together. I think for me, he obviously had previous, I think it was experience alongside Richie Wellens, I think it was at Doncaster.
And Swindon as well, I think.
And Swindon Town as well, and I think at Swindon they probably did a bit better than they did at Doncaster. But nonetheless, he's got the qualifications. I think he knows what Reading supporters want from their team in terms of style of play, in terms of identity. And that's one of the reasons why I think if we don't appoint Paul Ince, I think he should be firmly involved actually in the managerial recruitment process. I think there has to be a similar style of play from the first team to the under-23s, and I think it has to be embedded throughout the whole club. Maybe that's a bit of a risk. I think similar happened at West Brom with Valerian Ismail, but I think Noel Hunt knows what we want, and I think in terms of pressing forward and that sort of thing. So I think it was a very good appointment. As I said, I don't think it was a case of getting the band back together or anything, but I can see us progressing under him actually, and I think he's a face as well that's willing to speak to the media and willing to speak to the in-house team. So I can't really criticise this move at all.
Well, he's also someone that people listen to. If there's a YouTube video up of Scott Marshall speaking in 2019, no one's really going to watch that. But if it's Noel Hunt, you think, I'll see what Noel Hunt's got to say, because we know him and everything. I do think it's a good appointment. And on Adam's point on the style of play and everything, as Reading did probably still do try and do that, it's why we've produced players like Elise and Liam Kelly is another one, and Aaron Cool, who are all ball-playing players. And Tom McIntyre and Tom Holmes, if they came out in 1997, they wouldn't be able to kick a ball anything other than 30 yards and into touch. But actually, because of the way the academy is set up, they're good ball-playing defenders.
Yeah, and I think I remember speaking to Lee Heron for an interview for the Tilehurst End podcast about, this must have been about 5 years ago, and he was talking about that kind of philosophy. But he also kind of said, we have to make sure that we're not completely dependent on what's currently going on in the first team. Because, look, how many... So if you'd come into the club as an 11-year-old, you're on your, 6th, 7th Reading manager? And half of them have had very different styles of playing, so you can't then suddenly say, say they came in the Stam era and it's all tiki-taka, possession, then suddenly Mark Bowen's coming in and it's, I want to get it forward, and then Paul Ince, a few years later is coming in and I want a bit more blood and thunder. It's a really difficult thing. So I think the thing that Lee Heron was saying is we have to bring through rounded players and players of different styles and different options for a manager, and also bear in mind that our academy should also be producing players for other football clubs, because we should be selling on players for 250 grand to Coventry, to 100 grand to Swindon, that kind of thing, and they're not all going to be after the same kind of player. So it is useful to have your Jake Cooper in your central defence coming through your academy the same way as maybe a ball playing Tom McIntyre type.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, just to round off this discussion, I think for next year it is something that I think the club probably do have to do a better job of making the academy more visible. And that's probably, they will tell you it's down to money and their manpower and what they can do, and obviously the effort that goes into creating videos and content and stuff and just covering games for the academy. I know they spoke about that with Star, but it's something that I think we as fans, when it comes to this sort of nebulous idea of creating more of a feel for the club.
And can I just say as well, I think it's one of these things that we tend, as fans, tend to focus on when things are going badly. I don't really... Can anyone tell me how the under-21 side or the reserves were doing in 2005-06? I can't really remember.
I know.
I remember a season later they won.
Well, I was going to say,
we
did win the Premier League under McDermott, which I only remember because they paraded the trophy on the pitch.
In 05-06 no one cared. I don't remember how the academy were getting on in 2002-03 under Pardew or the season before. But again, I think when things are bad, suddenly attention turns to, okay, well, who's going to make it better? Let's have a look at these academy sides. At the end of the day, if the first team are delivering on the pitch, you don't really care as much. Obviously, it's nice to know the next generation is coming, but I'm not too worried about how they're getting on. Again, if we've got a successful team go through, we only need 1 or 2 academy products coming through.
And also, the under-23s this year were playing Arsenal and Tottenham, and all the under-18s were in the Premier League South against Arsenal. These clubs and academy players that have had so much more time and money invested in them and all sorts of stuff that we just can't do. So it is a very difficult position we're in. I think the club's still doing all right for academy. We'll have to see what next year produces, because ultimately predicting these sorts of things is very difficult from our point of view anyway. Benjamin Vickers tweeted us in saying, Halilovic, was he underused? There were definitely times this season when Ajaria, sometimes even Swift, were off the pace. Adam, I suppose this is one of the weird ones for the injury crisis, is that Halilovic quite often pops up on the bench but didn't play, and I guess there is a bit of a anomaly about that, isn't there?
Yeah, I think in terms of Halilovic, I think one of the detrimental factors to his playing time is the fact that John Swift has managed to stay fit for most of the season, whereas last season he didn't. I think he spent a large period kind of out. So in terms of Halilovic, obviously he's had his injury problems as well. So for me, I think that those two factors are kind of interlinked in a way, in terms of sort of getting quite a bit of playing time under his belt this season, and being a difference maker as well when he's someone you'd want on the pitch. So yeah, in terms of Halilovic, that was probably the factor for me that limited his playing time.
He fits into the kind of weird position that I think we only touched on it very briefly that Jamari Clark fit into, where a lot of the time we'd be sat on the bench and you'd be screaming at Paunovic, make a change, bring somebody else on, bring something different on, and he just didn't do it. I still have no idea what's going on with Clark. I think ever since those 2 goals at Birmingham, he just disappeared. I think he briefly played in the Kidderminster game. Yeah,
12 sub-appearances he made in the league. So it did have but I think a lot of those were, because it's Paunovic and he only made subs in the 85th minute, you could probably tot up the amount of minutes he played on 2 hands, couldn't you?
Again, all you can do is try and give the benefit of the doubt to the people that see them day in, day out on the training ground. And with the desperate position that Reading were in for much of Halilovic's time with the club, if he had been banging in goals left and creating goals left, right and centre on the training ground, I've got to believe he would have been thrown in. So there had to be something going on.
Yeah, and also, ultimately he was at Birmingham, and I think they did want to keep him last season, but if a player's of his statures at Birmingham and he leaves, and he probably had offers from lesser leagues in reality. Fulham and Bournemouth weren't fighting over him for a reason.
Players tend to get better in struggling teams when they're not playing, don't they? Yeah. The best players are the ones that aren't currently playing because they're not in the firing.
The idea of Halilovic is much better than
exactly that. And I refuse to believe that again that we had this star player that was just waiting. Yeah, he had a couple of nice moments, but I think his crowning glory was that goal against, was it Middlesbrough? Where I don't think he means it at all.
Absolute scuffed rolled in.
I don't think he was a real star at Birmingham either. I didn't exactly see him hit the headlines too often either. So I think for me that's another factor for me kind of being in favour of kind of trusting the coaching staff on this one.
Well, I think unless the manager who comes in has a real demand for him, I'd imagine that's the last we've seen of him and many other players. Speaking of which, the final question this week of the mailbag, Peter Taylor saying, to ints times 2 or not to ints times 2? Obviously Paul and Tom are both out of contract now. Tom Ince, who was supposedly on a pretty decent wage at Stoke, which I think we pretty much covered anyway, so we didn't really make much of a financial saving in sending Liam Moore to Stoke, but now we've got Liam Moore back, funnily enough, which is a whole other kettle of fish, which we won't get into now because we've got plenty of time over the summer to discuss Liam Moore. But let's do Paul Ince first then, and fairly quick answers so we don't keep everyone up all night listening to this or through their commute as they're hanging on to get into work. Paul Ince, yes or no? I think my mind was probably made up quite early on in his reign, thinking that it's all well and good that we're staying up and everything, but for long term, I don't think anything's going to change around the club and all that sort of stuff that we've spoken about if we have Paul Ince in charge.
Yeah, similar to me with Mark Bowen. I thought he was going to run out of steam. I think he did towards the end of his tenure, and I think that it was kind of similar with Paul Ince as well, kind of towards the end of the season. So for me, it's a no.
I think I'm just about falling into the no camp. I think especially with the way the season ended, I think it's just kind of shown that getting that short-term reaction, great, as you mentioned, long-term, but again, this all comes back to the plan. And if it is,
there's a plan.
Exactly. If there is a plan, and they sit down with Paul Ince, and Paul Ince says, "I want to try and play this way. To do it, I will need this amount of money or players or resource," and the club go, "We like this plan. We can back you, and we will back you. Go ahead and do it." Then give him a season to do. Well, at least a season to show that, for the roots to take hold. If it's going to be a hodgepodge, and the club are still like, actually, we still need another year to kind of get through things, or even a mix of the two, then maybe it's time to move on.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one could even make the argument that he'd be a better manager for the hodgepodge because of how he managed it. Yeah. And I suppose it just feels to me like a bit of a summer romance, a little bit of well, that was amazing. Do I want to do that for the rest of my life? Actually, maybe not.
It's Jose Gomez 2.0, isn't it?
It really does feel like
it's like it's like going on a holiday and you meet someone for a couple of weeks, and it's fine for a couple of weeks, but then afterwards you're just like, yeah, that's it now.
Yeah, there's a reason why.
You're a heartless man. Warning for wherever Adam goes on summer holiday.
That is your warning.
It is. Yeah, well, I don't know where you're going on summer, but yeah, we'll send a local warning out. But yeah, for Tom Ince, I'd probably be inclined to say if he's cheap enough, because he's obviously, there's nowhere that's going to pay him the Stoke wage, so he's going to have to get down his head, and he's actually getting caught on now. So would you just tell him, like, you'll be a bit of a squad player, maybe play him a bit more centrally so he doesn't have to run as much, and just say, you're going to have to be a bit more of a presence in the dressing room and that sort of stuff. It doesn't suit everyone, and I don't know him as a man, so it's difficult, but if that is something he's capable of, maybe give him a 1-2 year contract, but it is difficult.
It's tricky, isn't it? I think I don't want to be too harsh on the man, because I think he's performed admirably. I think from when he joined up until when he got his injury against Hull, which was a shocking tackle, if that was the tackle that ended his season. Tom Ince is a player that's not really fulfilled his potential. I think he's underperformed for quite a few seasons. Obviously, he joined Stoke for like £10 million. So, is he the type of player that we want? Would we rather have a load of players punching above their weight? We do need quite a few players, though. Perhaps, maybe as you mentioned, maybe 3 or 4 players, maybe some older heads in there, which I think would be ideal, perhaps. But I think we need a mix, perhaps, of players that are punching above their weight and perhaps have that quite high up. So if we do recruit Tom Ince, I don't think we should have too many of his type of players, maybe 3 or 4.
You need the veteran presence, but you have to accept that any veteran presence that's going to end up at Reading probably going to be on the way down. And that's a difficult thing to fill your dressing room with. Yeah,
look, absolutely. I agree with Adam. It's got to be a good mix. If Tom Ince is one of the best older, experienced heads available on a cheap deal, and you sit down with a player and he's got, a point to prove as well, and that's important. He's got to want to be here, not because it's my best kind of option. He's got to be able to, think I've got something to prove here. I want to help and contribute, rather than just they've offered me a deal. Yeah, why not? I'll stay.
Yeah, no, 100%. He's got to want it as well, hasn't he? Yeah, and that's we'll find out. I guess that's the beauty of where we're at. Is this kind of clean slate? We've got to start laying down some bricks to murder that analogy. So over the next few weeks, we'll find out. Keep it tuned with the Tilehurst End. We're going to the summer preview now. Talk about what comes next.
Keep up to date with all things Reading FC. Follow the Tilehurst End on Facebook and Twitter.
This podcast is proudly sponsored by ZCZ Films. Remember, if you want to get involved in sponsoring the show, drop us an email to thetilehurstend@gmail.com.
So let's start then with the prediction league for the season that has just been, the Tilehurst End Prediction League, and well, there was some last day drama, as one would always imagine, and Ollie Allen has pulled out with a 1-0 win for Luton. He picked up 3 points there, so he has claimed the league honours.
Congratulations. Well done, Ollie. Well done, Ollie.
There we go. And so I counted it back. I spent a fair amount of this afternoon going back through and making sure everything was in order. So there were actually a couple of missed points over the season that I have had to add back in. Didn't alter what we thought was going to happen, so that's all fine.
Marc, I saw you take some sort of a brown packet with Ollie's name on it before the show started. I don't know anything to do with it.
Yeah, it's amazing. He picked up 4-4 for Swansea. Who'd have thought that happened when he said 3-1 on the podcast? But there we go. No, so it just means that Ollie picked up 33 points, Westy 31. Adam, you come third with 28. I'm cleaning out fourth with 23. Handbags 22. Ben, Thomas 19. Simeon pick up 18. Which is always a bit awkward when the editor of the website is the bottom one. So we'll have to work out a system.
These editors, they're terrible, aren't they?
I know. They've no knowledge. So, congratulations to Ollie for picking that one up. The little dancer that pops out with a cake will be arriving at your house tomorrow morning. Do let your parents know.
It's going to be really awkward when he doesn't listen to the podcast tonight.
Yeah. It's just for me.
So there was a question from Sean Burgess last week that came in that I wanted to cover off as a sort of summer preview way of looking forward, and that's what he thinks the next season's starting 11 will be. And obviously picking out various free agents that we're aware that are coming out of Colchester isn't going to work. So we'll just briefly run through the positions, and if we're going to have a player that's already here, a player that we want to re-sign, or just say another, as I think we used to do on the
Trialist A, Trialist B.
Yeah.
I really like to look at Trialist E. I think we might go that far this season.
I've done the old Championship Managers scouting for the next 2 months.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I've just turned up international caps to the top, and I've ended up got Stern John again.
Is Taribo West still available?
I saw Sam Sodji on TV earlier today, and I thought, these players that you forget about. So goalkeeper, Luke Southwood, Nyland, someone else. I think I'll probably
Adam Davis, maybe from, I think, Sheffield United, if they don't kind of trigger his extension.
I'd probably give it to Nyland,
Yeah.
I'd have a season of Nyland.
I mean, we haven't touched on it, have we, on this entire show, but the enduring final image of Reading season being Nyland getting pantomimed, he's behind you, just absolutely summed up the season. Look, Nyland, I don't think has been a massive upgrade on Luke Southwood.
No.
It depends if we're going to turn around to Luke Southwood and say we're giving you 46 games, then that confidence boost can really help players, and in which case I would be fine with it. But
I don't see them going back to Southwood. I think the fact that he's been passed over twice now again suggests there is something that the club don't trust in him.
Carl Hine back on loan.
Yeah, I was going to say I could see. I was actually impressed with Hine. I thought in that Peterborough game he did well. I think he played the Blackburn game as well.
Yeah, we got it. It was only about 3 in the end. I know it was I forgot now. But it was Hine who came in for about 3 games. Bristol City away, maybe.
Birmingham City at home, he was pretty good.
Any of those 3 names mentioned, I think, would be okay.
Yeah.
I think for a team whose target is 4th from bottom, I think Luke Southwood is okay. I think Nyland will be okay, and I think Hine would be okay.
I guess the thing is with Southwood is if we do give him the chance and give him them one jersey, does he have the potential to turn into like a Premier League level goalkeeper? I suppose if the club did want to gamble and actually say, we might have an asset here, because Nyland isn't going to be an asset. Nyland's going to be a journeyman now for the rest of his career, basically. Right back, Yeardom, I think we'd all keep him, whether we get the chance or not. I mean, if we don't keep him, it's another, isn't it? Centre back, I think, would Tom Holmes and Tom McIntyre as a centre back force next year really excite you? We've got Scott Dan as well.
No. No, look, I've just said we conceded 87 goals this year. I'm sorry, but something's got to change that back 4. And I love Tom McIntyre. I quite enjoy Tom Holmes, but they are not the ones. And especially, McIntyre's got to stay as far away from left back as possible.
I'd actually have. The thing for me is, if you brought, say, Nottingham Forest manager Steve Cooper in, I think he'd coach Tom Holmes into a better player. I think there's room for potential there, room for improvement. I think if you have someone really experienced alongside him, he could become okay, like a Curtis Davis or someone like that.
Like Michael Morrison, one could argue. That's the difficult thing,
It's
isn't
interesting
it?
as well. I mean, if you had the choice of one of the 2, who would you keep? Andy Yeardom or Tom Holmes? Do you keep Tom Holmes because he can play? Don't forget, he did really well at right back.
I know, I think he's as good
in
at right back
Paunovic's
as
best
centre
run.
back. Yeah.
Is there an argument to say, okay, well, we keep Tom Holmes because he can fit and offer him the pay rise up to Yeardom's level, and say, you can do 2 roles here. You're going to play every week in one of those 2 positions.
Yeah, well, for the next 4 or 5 years as well. I think for me it has to be, I think if you can keep Holmes and another, and then you have McIntyre, I'd probably elevate him as a midfielder now. I don't think his role is centre-back. And then you have Jerry Dorset's heard some good rumours, good murmurs coming out of his loan spell at Rochdale, I think it is.
Yeah.
Someone like him and Scott Dan as your backups to Holmes and another, if we keep Holmes, that is, I think is probably just about as good a starting point as you can get at this point in time. Left back, Do we have any left backs now?
I mean, I don't know what's happening with Neil Taylor at Middlesbrough, but are we going to be able to meet his wage demands?
But then you're
not.
talking another player who is kind of on the way down and everything. So
I think you possibly go. I think you go the loanee route again.
Yeah.
I think you find another loanee.
left backs are so specialist as well, aren't
Just
they?
going back to centre back as well. We haven't talked about Liam Moore, who is probably our highest paid player and back at the club for last year of his contract.
So it's Sonia Luca all over again, isn't it?
Yeah.
You get rid of these players with 18 months left in their contract, and it's like, yeah, they're still here for the last year.
Yeah.
Like, they haven't got.
So they've got the decision to make now. It's a case of, lots of people are saying, oh, well, just release him. Well, Liam Moore is a professional footballer, and he's not just going to write off. He's rumoured to be on
30 grand a week, isn't it?
Even if it's 20, 20 grand over the course of a season is, times 52 weeks is, £1 million. He's not just going to write that off because his value has dropped to the point where no one's ever going to pay him that again.
He's also not that bad that you'd lose £1 million and a player. You wouldn't do that, I don't think. So it's up to the new manager, isn't it, really?
Exactly. So it's a case of, okay, even if Liam Moore said, okay, I will write off half of my deal. So then, you're still paying 15 grand a week. So you might as well keep it and keep him around. And he's got the incentive, presumably, of saying, I need to earn another deal. I'm only in my early 30s. I don't want my football career to finish. We saw it from Hal Robson-Canoe enough. Last year of contract can do wonderful things for people. So if he sticks around the club, and whether it's, because there's going to be a new manager, where that manager sits down with him and says, Liam, we need 12 months out of you. In all honesty, have you got it? And he says yes. Put him in the mix for one of those 4 centre-backs.
Yeah, he'll only work under obviously it's going to be a newish manager, but I think he'll only work under a club that has had a bit of a changeover, maybe a new director of football, that sort of thing. Centre mid, I think we'd all give Winterbottom and Laurent new contracts. I've thrown McIntyre in the mix for it. You've got Tetek as well. That's a position which if you do keep those two players, you can have a bit of fun with, because you don't have to go and sign a Danny Drinkwater again. You can sign Josh Laurent 2.0 if you've got those two as your starters every week.
I think Laurent's gone.
I know Laurent has gone, but Rinomota is a bit more of a question mark because he's not had a good season. Rinomota.
His injury record might just keep him at Reading,
and the fact we have got we can give him a pay rise, if we want to, and if we feel he's good enough. Like if we feel he is over the injuries, the club knows better than anyone what injury he has. If he's over it, then if he's not, they might actually just say, we're only going to give you this. Might not be what he wants.
Because don't forget, we tend to think of ourselves in a bit of a vacuum, don't we, as a football club? But there are most clubs in the Championship are going through financial strife. It's only the big boys that are coming down from the Premier League that tend to have the money to splash, or the odd team that's sells a striker to a Premier League club, for example. For most, they've not got the money to splash around. Very few clubs are going to be able to go and turn around to Andy Rinomota and say, here's 20 grand a week.
And also what clubs are going to do it, like Norwich.
Exactly.
They're going to be looking more like Swift and Laurent than Rinomota. And I think Cardiff, like that sort of lot, they're not going to have significantly more money.
Do you want to uproot your family, move from an area that you've been at to go there? Again, it's about selling projects to players. And there might be the right agent, right manager that can do it. But for the players that are here and have patchy records, there is the opportunity to get them back.
Wingers then.
What's a winger? I haven't seen one for a year.
Occasionally this guy called Junior Hoylett pops up for us when he's not injured or missing his flights home from Canada. I probably would give Hoylett another year because I think he's probably been one of our better free agents, and just generally he's a bit of a steady player, isn't he? He's not too flash, gives it a good go every game, and is someone that as a squad player, if we're not relying on him,
and he's signed for a decent contract because he has signed in the era where we can't offer a lot of money. And it's the only slight concern of Hoylett is it is a World Cup year. Canada obviously at the World Cup, but how's that going to impact it? I don't know. From what I've seen for a few players speaking about this, is that they want to be playing football. He wants to be in that Canada squad, and that's not guaranteed. If he leaves Reading and suddenly can't find a club, or he goes to League One, or he's a bit part player at like a
a different team again. He's had to move to a different. If he goes to Middlesbrough or something like that, and he's a bit part player there,
I just worry more about the kind of availability and the sort of effects of going out to Qatar and things like that in the second half of the season.
Well, for the second half of the season, yeah, but for the first half of the season, I don't think it is a problem. But second half, yeah, obviously. Luckily now we're not in League One. We are going to have the World Cup off, which is something to think about for next season. Attacking mids, Ejario is going to be there for another year. No one's going to go and sign him, are they? We've spoken about Ince. It's just going to have to be signings, and those. I think it's difficult with signing wingers and stuff like that, because you end up Brandon Barker's a tenner penny in English football, aren't they? You can sign so many wingers who you can find a highlight reel of them playing amazingly over the course of a season, but actually boil it down to 46 games and it turns up to 1 goal and 2 assists, and a lot of not very much happens.
It's like Estevez before he came to Reading, and yeah, he did okay, Estevez, but his highlight reel it's like he was Cristiano Ronaldo. Yeah,
no, exactly. Strikers, João Mate. I guess Mate probably. Well, we don't know what the new manager's going to want to do with him, winger/striker. I don't think any of the academy kids are going to pop up as a striker or something this year. Melvin Lambert, that sort of lot. I think a lot of them are going as well. So the question with the striker is, are we going to sell Lucas João? Unfortunately, that's the question that is going to define what we do in terms of whether we say we're not going to sell him. Maybe they'll have money to give him a new contract. He's at that age now. He's in the best form of his life. If you take over the last 2 seasons, he is at that age where this is it for him. He's going to have to go. His next contract is going to have to be the best he's ever earned, and he's not going to get that ready.
Any other season, I would say without a shadow of a doubt, sell him. Injury record isn't good enough. He's on probably decent money, and Reading can get decent money for him. But if you sell Lucas João with the squad we've got at the moment,
what have you got left?
Exactly, and that is we had the question from sort of Nick earlier about how do the board let youngsters go, and I sort of said this is the trap you get into, and this is the trap that Reading is still in, because they can't sign anybody as good. Well, maybe they'll unearth the next Kevin Doyle or Dave Kitson, we hope, but unlikely
you can't bank on it, can you?
Exactly, unlikely. We'll probably end up with the next Marc McNulty,
who would you give him a new contract?
I was going to say, yeah, with not too much love for him getting re-signed. So it's so difficult, but I just have to lean towards selling him, because I think, you just have to gamble that you can. And again, it all depends on this business plan we've got with the EFL. If we sell him for $5 million and the EFL said, great, you can spend 3.5, fantastic. But if the EFL turn around and say, well, you can only spend 500,000, then you just keep it.
Because relegation will cost us tens of millions of pounds if we don't come straight back up.
And what's going to happen with George Puskas as well? Is he going to come back? What's going to happen with him?
Let's go Pisa.
Let's go Pisa. Pisa are in the Serie B playoffs, aren't they?
We're all sat here in our Pisa shirts. You can't see it in this podcast.
I'd be amazed if a new manager comes in and thinks, you know what, George Puskas is the guy, but I can't rule it out.
There's nothing right. There is nothing wrong with George Puskas if you are playing 4-4-2 or if you are playing an attacking brand of football that gets balls into the box. He can be a useful component. But Reading, throughout his time here, except for funnily enough, the season he scored 13 goals, whatever it was, have barely ever played that. And Kel Surprise, the poacher, doesn't, people like Jamie Curtin found it tough when Alan Pardew moved to a one-up top formation. They just can't do it. So like McNulty, Puskas isn't useless. There's nothing wrong with keeping him, but being a highly paid player in a team that doesn't play a 2-striker formation, there's no point keeping him.
Right, he also just cannot play alongside Lucas João. That just doesn't work at all, does it?
No, not unless you go out and change the complete style, and I said, and go 4-4-2, two wingers.
4-4-2, him and João up front, I don't think would work.
Well, if João wins the knock-ons and Puskas is there in the box, maybe, but...
as you said, it's just little point of having him if we're going to play one up top. It's just like having a chocolate teapot, really.
You see the goals that he scored for Pisa, and obviously I don't watch the 90 minutes, but you see he's scored a few goals, and firstly you realise that Serie B is obviously not as good as the Championship, and he has but they are generally kind of like goal mouth scrambles and stuff like that, or on the break and someone puts a good ball into him, like stuff that we don't do. Basically,
We'll bring back the Anglo-Italian Cup to prove who is superior, Serie B or the Championship. It's been 20 years. It's time to bring it back.
We'll have another tour of Italy.
That'd be fantastic.
Yeah, that's it. Maybe the George Puskas has opened the door for us now to have a tour of Italy, just like we did. It was basically just over 100 years. Was it 1921?
Yeah,
we did that.
I think it was before the First World War, wasn't it? When we went and beat like AC Milan.
Yeah, maybe 9. Yeah,
so crowned they would describe as like the best football team the world's ever seen.
Roger Tifford, if he's listening to this now, is shouting the answer down his headphones. I mean, that's just where we're at. I think so many players are going to have to be signed, and we have to be very wise in how we do it. And just my final point I'd say on this is that we played Luton on last day of the season, who are in the playoffs now, and I looked at the start of the summer, or during the summer when we were flailing about, they signed 3 or 4 players very early on free transfers in the start of the season, or start of the transfer window. They knew who they wanted, they went inside them, integrated them into the squad. Players like Amari Bell, left back, got him from Blackburn, 3 contract. Now he's their first choice, and he's on the verge of being a Premier League player, and that's what we need to do. Just know who we want, go get them. They don't have to be flashy or anything like that. Just players do jobs.
Coach him and drill him, and that's, we've mentioned Marc Bowen several times. The rumour mill as he's coming back.
Yes, before you get onto that, I was just thinking, what's build, evolve, succeed? That's what we need to. Is that
tenacity, spirit, and flair?
That's what we need to trust the process. Do we have a process? No. That's the final point, and we'll end the podcast then with our hopes for the summer. Marc Bowen is supposedly coming back as a director of football. I think this is a good move. I don't think it's a great move. I think he's been burned as being a manager. I think he's happy to go back into coaching and stuff now. Wimbledon was an absolute shambles that he couldn't turn around. So I think he's happy now to quite clearly go back into being in that behind-the-scenes role. You look at his record when he was at the club, we didn't really sign anyone because we weren't able to, so we can't really think about what his transfer capability is. But he does know he knows the club, he knows the financial situation, and he's a pretty intelligent bloke. He's a footballing bloke, he knows the Championship. I'd say that it's probably as good as, we're not going to go and get a director of football who blows our socks off, are we? So I suppose he's probably just about right, isn't he?
Yeah,
you've wanted him as director of football for years, haven't you, Adam?
I've wanted him for a couple of years now. I think he would have been more useful for us behind the scenes, and I think that's exactly what it'll be this time as well. He's a footballing head behind, behind the scenes. He can be, towards the end of Belko Panovic's era, you could tell that we needed someone to take the burden off him a little bit about the off-field situation. That's where he could be useful as well. And we mentioned earlier, just touched on a little bit, managerial turnover, and I think that's one of the reasons why we've needed a director of football, because we need someone with a bit, someone who's a constant there, amid, change of styles and a change of direction. We need someone who's going to be a constant there. So having Marc Bowen back, I think can only be a good thing, really.
Is he going to make himself manager again?
Oh, don't know. He's got contacts with himself.
He knows the guy.
He knows himself. Just for the memes alone, it'd be fantastic. I completely agree with what Adam said. I don't think there's much more to add. I think we've talked about it for the whole show. A plan needs to be put in place. A new the way the club works fundamentally needs to change, because it's not worked in the way that Dai has wanted to run the club, or who he's trusted to run the club hasn't worked. All the things you said, Marc, are absolutely valid. He knows the division, knows the club, so he's not coming completely off the street and having to learn things. He's going to be able to get up to speed very quickly. And like Adam and yourself have said, that is the imperative this summer. We have to hit the ground running.
Yeah, and they've got to communicate with the fans as well. That's the one message that I'd have. Communicate with the fans. Start off on the right foot in the summer. Get your free transfers in early if you can. But communicate with the fans.
He's a good speaker as well, Marc Bowen. I'll give him that credit as well. The lights are being terminably dimmed in this Brewdog that we're in. It's continually, as the lights are going out on Reading season, the lights are slowly going out as I think we're the last people in this place, and it's getting on. So we will just have one last little bit to throw our cards on the table before we round off this season review and go into the summer, and that is the thing that I'm sure you're absolutely relishing, saying your early prediction for where we're going to finish next season and what's going to happen over the summer. While you think about that, I'll go first, and I think that in reality, for what we've all said, I think we are going to end up, I don't think we're going to be as hodgepodge as we've been in quite as much the last couple of years, but I think we're going to still have that element about us. And I think we will probably discover with Josh Laurent, maybe two, or maybe one of the academy kids will come through, although my quite pessimism on that I've spoken about. So I think we are going to probably stay up again next season because our transfer record is good. There is no doubt about that when it comes to bringing in players. Whether we sell Lucas Zhao or not, I think it'll have a big impact. If we don't, obviously that adds a couple of places up. I think we're going to finish about 17th next season, partly on blind optimism, partly on the sense that this club has to do something. And whether that involves a wholesale change of culture or not, I kind of doubt. But I think this club is going to be forced into such a dramatic rebuild that I think they've almost got no option with the funds that are kind of available to them. I think they will get a large element of it right. Whether they get the manager appointment into a long-term plan point of view, I doubt. But I do think that this club knows how to stay in this division. And Adam, I'll throw to you for your predictions now.
I mean, this summer's going to be an absolute game changer. It's going to define where we are, perhaps in the next, not even just next season, but the next couple of years as well. We've got to start strongly and have a productive window. For me, I'm going to say 20th. There's only so long you can flirt with relegation before you actually take the drop. But I don't know. For me, is there going to be three worse teams than us next season? I'm not 100% sure. I think we might just about remain afloat again. But it's so harsh to judge at the moment because the summer's not come and gone yet. I just hope that perhaps the appointment of Marc Bowen is going to be the start of something. And we've got to treat this as fans. We've got to treat this as the start. Things won't be fixed overnight with just bringing in Marc Bowen. There's got to be radical changes throughout the club. So if we can get the radical changes, then we can finish in a reasonably high position. But for me, I'm going to go with 20th.
Well, Dan, I feel like we should have Ash's Embrace playing over the amount of music that we've stolen over this podcast.
It was going to be hard to monetise a video of this on the YouTube algorithm. I think too many people are going to have a claim on this. Where do I think we're going to finish? I think 17th and 20th. I think, again, just to be different, I'll say 19th.
I feel like if we're saying that, then other not fans of our club will be saying 24th.
Fans' expectations next season need to be for 21st again. And I think fans, like you say, have to be patient. They have to understand that we've got 1 year left of this business plan to grit our teeth and get through. And the whole club needs revolutionising in the way it's been run. We're in such a mess. It takes time for drugs to kick in on a patient to get better again. You don't get well the second you put a pill in your mouth. It takes time to get through your system, and Reading have had so much damage done to our system over the past few years. It's going to take a while. And look, if we step again next season and suddenly we're free from EFL rules, we're trusted again, and most importantly, the owner has learned his lesson to be able to know the mistakes he's made in the past and not make them again, then the things are looking up. But look, I can make an argument for 24th, because any club that's going into a summer with 9 players under contract is staring up against it, and we've got to get so much right this summer just to stay up.
It actually feels like just one decision can make the difference. If we get the goalkeeper situation wrong and end up with a João Virginia or a late season Luke Southwood, then that could be the thing that we could lose 3-0 in the first game of the season because of 2 goalkeeper errors or something like that, and then it just cascades. It feels like that tightrope, doesn't it?
Or going into the season we're just saying, okay, we can keep paying João, but he's the only striker we can afford all season, and João does his ligaments.
Yeah,
that's the tightrope we're walking. And like you say, unfortunately, the margin for error for Reading Football Club has gone down because the Championship isn't going to be as weak next season. So, look, I think we'll stay up, but put it this way, I'm not going to be booking the playoff. If I was booking another wedding, which thankfully I'm not, I would have no qualms of booking it for the playoff final date.
Yeah.
Because I don't think Wembley's on our horizons.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair enough. I suppose to end this podcast on a slightly optimistic note is that no one wants to be protesting, no one wants to be throwing tennis balls on the pitch or anything like that, and I really hope it doesn't come to that. I'm not at all the first person to advocate that sort of thing, so at least supporting Reading Football Club is never boring. We are never sat there with like 35 years in a row in League One, or getting bored of the Premier League and then realising we've thrown it away and now we're a boring Championship club again after like Charlton or something like that. We are terminally interesting, and there is always something going on, and we are going to be hooked over the summer. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be hooked as to who we keep, going to be hooked as to who the manager is, who they're going to bring in, what sort of interviews they're going to do. I mean, we're hoping to at some point get some sort of access with the club over the summer. There's going to be the 106 versus the 2012 game as well, more 150th anniversary stuff. It's a really interesting time to be a Reading fan. But it is a white knuckle ride, isn't it? That's what being a fan of this club is at the moment. And let's see what the next dip or rise takes us, I suppose, is all I can say. As the police car zooms past, I didn't think Anton Zumgavich was in town these days, but there we go. I can put those things at the end of the podcast because not many people are listening now. But for those who are, thank you so much for joining us for this season review. Thank you so much for joining us through the season. To getting to 300 episodes of this podcast is something that I know me and Dan would have thought was just a silly thought when we respectively took over the podcast, and all the effort that goes into it and everything is thankfully minute compared to the amount of hours that get put in listening to it every week from you guys. So that makes it all worth it. We will be back next season. I'll be back next season. There is no getting.
Exclusively revealed, Marc has signed a new 1-year contract to stay on as host.
Rolling 1-year contract. I think the EFL let me be paid in 1 pint next season is my sum total of wage. But
Simmer's got the checkbook out.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think that's it really. Nothing left for me to do but to thank you guys for coming out tonight.
Absolute pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for having me back, and I can just echo what Marc said. To anyone who's listened to 100 or 300 of these episodes, you guys are the reason that it still happens. It's very much, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, Marc, but it's a show that's still done very much for the fans out there, and it's a great bit of fun for us to be able to do it. And if any of you guys have got suggestions, ideas, I'm sure the guys will be more than happy to take them on board.
Yeah, absolutely, that's it. And it is sometimes it's not the most fun thing in the world to sit there and want to do a podcast for a 7-0 defeat, but contrastingly, days like today, I could sit here and talk all evening about the various facets of the club. So it is always a great pleasure to have it, and a great joy to do it for the fans. So we will be back next year. Enjoy the summer. For those of you who are exhausted by the football club, and no doubt there are plenty of you, do take that time off of football, because we all need it every now and again, and you certainly can't have your lives being dominated by the travails of Reading Football Club, because it isn't really good for the mind all the time. So do that, take some time off, keep up to date with what's going on with the Tilehurst End, Facebook, Twitter and the blog. And, well, I imagine we'll be seeing you at some point in the next few weeks to talk about what's been going on in the summer. There'll be plenty to talk about, no doubt. And, as always, a big hearty, come on you ass.
Funny how they always be betrayal. You spy
Lovely stuff.